There's some big news to go over today as an NHL insider has dropped a surprising Leafs trade report. And as reports really start to pick up surrounding Brad Livings and his plans going forward, a brand new report has dropped revealing some very interesting details. We'll break down exactly what those are, as well as discuss some other interesting updates surrounding the Leafs. But before we get into it all, folks, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, you guys have been absolute beasts with the support. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. 71% of you are watching right now aren't subscribed. It would mean the world to Darius and myself if you could do so. Darius, a lot to go over today, and a surprising report has dropped surrounding a name that almost everyone's familiar with, but being linked to the Leafs now, a bit of a surprising turn of events here. And let's start with this from Jeff Merrick. So he spoke out regarding Erik Karlsson. He said he's always been attached to the Panthers, and every year it was the Panthers are interested in Erik Karlsson. Of course, Jeff Merrick used to be with Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast, has a lot of intel. He said, I don't know if it's going to happen, but he's going to move somewhere, maybe throw a dart in there. And of course, I hope he doesn't go to the Florida Panthers. That would be very frustrating. But you pair that with a new report that is dropped from Marco D'Amico saying that Erik Karlsson is another right-handed shot defense option that the Toronto Maple Leafs, Detroit Red Wings, Ducks, and the Utah Mammoth have been calling on. So, Darius, a lot of things going on here. There's also a report just throw in there with Elliot Friedman saying to keep an eye on the situation. A trade's probably going to happen here. So multiple reports. We have one from Chris Johnson we'll get into later. But it seems that Erik Karlsson and the Leafs have been involved in some conversations here, which very interesting. That would be another defenseman that they acquire through I guess the trade market. It's an interesting note here from Marco D'Amico.
Definitely. Yeah. And we know that, we talked last week about the Toronto Maple Leafs possibly acquiring Brian Rust as a top six winger from the Pittsburgh Penguins, or even Rickard Rakell. They make similar money, similar term, all of those things, and they're similar in age. So it could make some sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They do have some more cap space now, right? They just traded away Ryan Reeves, and we know that, they're going to move off of David Camp and Calle Yarncroke as well. Obviously, if they can, that hasn't happened yet, but that is the plan right now. So thought that was very interesting. But calling on Erik Karlsson, that's an interesting one, because to me, I think the Leafs defense is solidified, at least in my eyes this year. I don't think that they're going to be trading Morgan Riley. At least it's unlikely. Anything can happen. And I think Brad Living does actually want to be bold. And I feel like he has the opportunity to actually do that now, because he doesn't really have to report to anyone besides the CEO. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself. But Erik Karlsson's an interesting one. He can still put up some decent points, like maybe 50 points a year, especially on a better team, because he was putting up, 40 to 45 points the last two seasons with the Pittsburgh Penguins. They weren't necessarily that good. And he's only 2 years removed from 101 points and winning the Norris Trophy. So I do think he can help a team. I just don't understand why it would be the Toronto Maple Leafs and where he fits in with the Toronto Maple Leafs, maybe on a third pairing. And he would be like the power play specialist because, Mitch Marner is gone. And obviously there's been a lot of talk. And I've been saying, for Morgan Riley to earn his cap hit, he has to play on the power play and well on the power play. But maybe Erik Karlsson could be that power play specialist on the point, right? Because he is all offensive. So there could be a fit in that way. The other thing I was thinking is maybe this is a type of situation where the Boston Bruins used to do this a lot. Can this player help our team? Yes. Should we go out and get him? I don't know. We're kind of on the fence about it, but another team in our division is going to get him. So let's go out and get him just to take him away from that team. I don't think that's the best strategy in any sport personally, but there could be a situation like that as well. Now, the Florida Panthers, I think that's an interesting one, Nick, because they have no salary cap space. Can they make it happen? Yes, because they've done some crazy stuff and they've won back-to-back Stanley Cup championships at this point. But that one doesn't make sense to me because they have no salary cap space for him. And of course, he makes a ton of money. There would probably have to be retained salary. But the other thing, and I think is interesting, the Pittsburgh Penguins view him as an asset. And we'll get to that in a bit. They're not going to give him away for nothing.
Yeah, and you look at the Panthers, I'm just not going to rule them out ever. Chris Johnson, trade is still possible. The Penguins, like you mentioned, are not just giving him away. And I mean, it makes sense. 101 points as a defenseman is, and I mean, not unheard of, but is very difficult to do. But even last year, he's still a very solid defenseman. But how would the salaries work with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Who would you have to give away? I mean, you'd assume if Erik Karlsson's coming in, one way or another, Morgan Riley would probably be shipped out in some regard. Even if it's not directly in this trade, you'd assume they'll probably trade him to another team for a top six forward, something like that, if you're bringing in Erik Karlsson. Because otherwise, you just have, a logjam, and no one else is really tradable on the Leafs right now. That would make a ton of sense. Like Jake McCabe and maybe Brandon Carlo, but like Chris Tanev, Jake McCabe, they're keeping them around, and the other defensemen don't hold much value. And yeah, very interesting report here. And you can also see within that the Leafs are making a serious push for him, which, I mean, shocking to be honest. And It's intriguing, especially given the Penguins situation. If the Matt Dumba trade goes through, no confirmation yet. The Penguins currently have 4 NHL established right side defensemen on their roster. And of course, they have a boatload of bottom pair left siders. Something's gotta give. I mean, you look at it there, like it makes a ton of sense for them to trade him. However, $10 million cap hit is a UFA after not this upcoming season, but the one after. And you pair that with the Toronto Maple Leafs cap projections, 5.3 million. Obviously, something would have to give here. But their defensive group, like where would you fit them in? You could absolutely find a spot for somebody like that. But then the assets you're giving back, would this be a Riley plus Domi situation that you're giving up and then some younger pieces? Because that would, of course, the salary would basically match there. You're at about 11 million. A lot of different avenues here to go, and they could absolutely make it work. Just seems a little bit surprising that they would. And I think if that's the case, they're going to have to pivot off of another one of their defensemen and still upgrade the top 6 because that does nothing for their top 6, though does provide them with an offensive minded and the best offensive defenseman they've had in the core 4 era, which is no longer the core 4. I guess the core 3 or core 4 with Matthew Nyes now beginning a new era there.
No name for it. No name for it. It's just the Toronto Maple Leafs at this point. But I do agree with you, right? It doesn't solve the top 6 problem. And again, if you look at the Leafs cap situation, if you want to get creative, you can call another team. You get a third team involved. There's retained salary. The assets would be absolutely absurd if you got a third team involved. But you can make it work with the salary cap because you can trade Calle Yarncroke, you can trade David Camp, and maybe you get to that amount. But then you have no money left. You have no flexibility throughout the season, and you still don't have your top 6 winger that we've been talking about, right? So that would make sense. Another defenseman would have to move. And one thing I think is interesting and why it could make some sense to bring in Erik Karlsson if the salary cap didn't exist, I do want to preference by saying that, but why it could make some sense is because, a couple of years ago, like 2018, 19, 20, like the Leafs were very offensively minded. We all know this, even leading up to a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And I feel like they've gotten to a point where they have, like, Jake McCabe at this point might be their best offensive defenseman, which is a little frightening, right? Maybe it's Morgan Riley. He still put up, half a point a game, which is not bad, but of course is paid quite a bit of money. But, one of those guys is your best offensive defenseman. You didn't get that much offense from your back end during the regular season. I think you almost got more offense in the playoffs from your back end than the entire regular season. So that could be something, again, like bring him in as a power play specialist. We know what he can do on special teams. And I do wonder, what he could do on a really good team. Erik Karlsson, this is on the back end, because he's still putting up, half a point a game numbers in the regular season. And again, just a couple years removed from 101 points. So could make some sense in that way. You'd have to make a lot of moves in terms of the salary cap. I would imagine Domi would have to go. And not only that, the Pittsburgh Penguins view him as an asset and an asset that can help a really good team win. And when you view, a player like that, not as a cap dump, you want futures, you want young players that can, make an impact soon, which is, we're talking about Danford, Easton Cowan, guys like that. And I'm not ready to part with guys like that. You've spent too much time developing them. And it just doesn't make any sense, I think, for that reason. But, again, could make some sense if the salary cap didn't exist and if you could just give up some players off the roster.
Yeah, maybe they're trying to change the DNA and then they replace Riley with Karlsson and then grab somebody else in the meantime for the top 6. It's intriguing. Like, I would prefer Erik Karlsson over Morgan Riley at this point, given this team, and maybe that's the same thinking that they have, and that's why they're pursuing him. At the end of the day, you mentioned it, the cap hit's pretty rough. They can make it work, and if they think it's going to be an improvement in the next 2 to 3 years, especially with the veteran leadership that he has, I can see it making some sense. Again, they'll have to move with former GM Kyle Dubas, so it'll be interesting there. Let us know down below. Do you want to see a trade? What your thoughts are on the all the different moves that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to have to make here to make this team very competitive. But again, the Penguins view him as an asset, so it's going to be interesting. Thank you guys for watching. See you later.